Welcome to Being Human. This week, delighted to say my guest is Richard WINDER. He's the global head of external affairs for Handelsbanken, and he's calling in from Sweden. Good afternoon, Richard.
Good afternoon to you too. Nice to speak to you.
Yes, it's fantastic. We've been able to make this happen. We connected on LinkedIn. You'd watched a couple of episodes, and when I saw a message from somebody from Handelsbanken, I was delighted. Handelsbanken was the main subject of the book Beyond Budgeting, which has been a huge influence on me in my career. And so
that's the connection. Yeah.
Yes, to speak to somebody with the inside track on what it's like to work for Handelsbanken was very exciting. So yes,
well, it's very, very, very flattering for us, always in these situations.
And for those who've not heard of Handelsbanken, you started in Stockholm, 1871, now a $3 billion business, 13,000 employees, 6 major markets, and hugely successful as a bank. Is there anything else to say about Handelsbanken to kind of set it up for people who aren't aware of it as a business?
Well, I guess we'll come to what's distinct about Handelsbanken. So, for us, we're present in almost 20 markets in the world, but we qualify that by saying that there are 6 markets which we deem to be our home markets, where we do domestic banking for corporate and individual customers, and they're all sort of Northern European markets, the Scandinavian markets. Then you've got Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Netherlands, and the UK, where we've been growing very well, pretty much from a standing start over the last couple of decades. So for us, obviously, it's great that we're growing. It's nice to have scale and all of that. But I think what drives Handelsbanken's success has very little to do with those numbers, really.
Right, and that's hopefully what we'll get into. So, I mean, I think the story, at least for me, begins with Dr. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it. Is it Jan or Jan Wallander?
Jan
Wallander, who took over the bank 1970, and then in 1972 decided that in order to implement the type of culture that he saw as being necessary in Handelsbanken, he would need to abandon budgeting, and hence that becoming the principal case study within the Beyond Budgeting book. Is that about right?
About right. I think Jan Wallander was interesting in a number of ways. Firstly, he wasn't a banker by training, and at that time it was very rare for someone who wasn't to be running a bank. He was an economist, and he was looking at sort of the social and industrial economy for some of Sweden's institutions and sort of organs of government, if you like. And through that, he developed a set of ideas, which he then had, through contacts and through a certain amount of chance, the opportunity to put into practice, not first at Handelsbanken, actually, but at a provincial bank up in the north of Sweden, which was many times smaller than Handelsbanken. And that's where he started to sort of introduce and if I can put it this way, play with the ideas of strong decentralization. So he was very much sort of taking some of his principles from the economics field and then testing them and developing them further and learning as he went. And he did very well at that bank over a small period of years. And how he came to Handelsbanken's attention was that his bank was starting to eat into our business, in a reasonably substantial way in that part of Sweden. So when we had our moment where we decided we needed to find a new direction and a new CEO, he was actually quite a natural person for the chairman of the board at the time to speak to. Yes, and so that's how he came in, sort of end of 69, beginning of 70. And his only caveat for taking on the role at what was Sweden's biggest bank at the time was that he could carry through his ideas in full, because he'd already realized by that time that you couldn't do part of the model that he'd created. It all fits together in a sort of an architecture, if you like. And so over that period, 1970 through maybe 73, 74, he did away with budgeting. That's true. He did away with fixed planning, which you'd say is fairly tightly connected, I suppose, to budgeting. And his main thinking was to devolve responsibility and accountability for day-to-day business decisions to the branches, to those people who are closest to the marketplace and closest to the customers as well, and that they would take better decisions. They would be able to deliver a better service to customers, a swift one, and one where the customer can understand what's going on and they're getting sensible decisions based on them, rather than sort of arcane systems that go on under the bonnet in head office somewhere. But by doing that, I mean, you sort of take the consequences of that and say, well, we don't need fixed planning. We don't need strategy departments in head office. We don't need a marketing department in head office. So he got rid of those, what you could disparagingly call middle management roles, and radically reduced the amount of central instructions that were being, at that point at least, were being pumped out to the branches day by day. It was a very swift, very radical change to a 100-year-old Swedish institution.
Right. And did the chairman back him all the way? Did he get a clear run at it, or were there any challenges in doing that?
Yeah, he did. The chairman, I suppose what's worth knowing about this is that the Swedish banks, the big Swedish banks, including Handelsbanken, had a pretty tumultuous 1960s sector, and not least, I think, for Handelsbanken, with credit quality, with profitability concerns, and indeed even to some extent, problems with the supervisors at the time as well. So, the board could see that there needed to be a significant change, and having made the decision on Jan Wallander and seen what he had done in this smaller provincial bank, they and particularly the chairman at the time had the faith that he knew what he was doing. He had some track record, and the courage, I think, to back him through that. And it was not an easy time. I think your question alludes a little to that. It wasn't an easy time. There was a lot of resistance from obvious places, inside and outside the organisation. One other thing that's quite interesting at that time, it was a time of sort of social, political change as well, of course, the early 70s. And the unions were growing in power in Sweden, and were with left-leaning political parties were looking at ways that workers could get more say and more influence over how the companies were being run. So this is, I think, where Jan Wallander's, the breadth of his thinking really came in, that he was able to adapt this model that he was bringing into the bank to take account of the need to adapt to the politics of the time. And this is where what you may have heard of, this profit sharing scheme came about, called Octagon, very, very long-term, equal for all staff profit sharing scheme, which Jan Wallander, along with the union leader for Handelsbanken at the time, together they pushed this idea through, both facing the unions and the politicians on the one side, and also the bank's board, the bank's owners, if you like, on the other side, to say this will further strengthen our model. This way of doing it really works for Handelsbanken. And I think it was a great feat, a great result that they managed to achieve that, when, of course, you can imagine the unions were looking for solidarity and a single industry-wide solution.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting piece of context to this.
Yeah.
And it's often said that these more decentralized modes of management tend to get more traction in the Nordic countries. And then when we think about business culture, it's important to be cognizant of the wider societal culture ones within, because they're connected.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Sweden is, a more left-leaning, has a more left-leaning politics than the UK and certainly the US. So, there is some of that, and the politics itself is informed by the Swedish history and social culture as well. So ideas. I think it's fair to say that it's a fertile seed bed for an idea like Handelsbanken's, and no doubt many others in other companies, Scandinavian companies as well.
Yeah. But what always fascinates me about this scenario is the paradox, where on the one hand we might think of this as being a left-leaning mindset, and yet very successful at capitalism, right?
Well, precisely, and Jan Wallander's thinking, and of course the board's thinking as well, was all about how to return Handelsbanken to strong, sustainable profitability. This was always the goal, and I mean that literally as well. The goal that was set by Jan Wallander was a profitability goal, but what's important about that is it was a relative profitability goal. What's important in business in reality is to over the long run do better than your competitors, and then you will stay in business and you will grow. So he just put that into a simple goal, which was to be more profitable than the average of our competitors each year. That would be our goal, our only corporate goal. And then he reasoned through that, there are clearly two parts to profitability. There's the income part and there's the costs part. So to get a higher income than our competitors, we needed to have highly satisfied customers. And to get lower costs is about working on your costs all the time. It's about cost control. So those were the two means he identified, very simple means to achieving that profitability goal. And everything in the business ought to be focused on either increasing customer satisfaction and or reducing or improving our cost efficiency. And if you do that, then you have to have faith that profitability will follow pretty naturally from that.
Right, and I thought so. There's a couple of elements to this which I find interesting. The first is that this idea, I think it was Lars Gronstedt, a later CEO, said this, that we don't expect people to compare their activities versus a predefined budget or plan. We're asking them to compare their performance with something real, like i.e. the performance of other banks if you're operating at that level, or interestingly the performance of other branches. So that's an interesting facet of the culture here, right? The branches within Handelsbanken will compare themselves against each other and to some extent compete against each other. Is that right?
That's a really good way of summing it up. So there are two aspects to this. There's the fact that benchmarking is so fundamental to Handelsbanken's way of doing things. And on the one hand, that is benchmarking externally, so that's our relative profitability goal. We just look at our market competitors and how they have done. We don't look at some sort of 12 months or 3 years hence, but instead we look at where we've arrived and where our competitors have arrived. But then internally, that's I think where it gets particularly powerful. We believe in not that individuals, colleagues, shouldn't have hard and fast targets of their own to chase, but they should benchmark themselves against other comparable units in the bank. And typically for Handelsbanken, of course, this means branches. So within one of our regional banks, for instance, we might have, for example, 50 branches. all of those branches can see the income and expenditures in quite some detail of their own branch, of course, but also of all the other branches in their region. And they are able to, clearly compare and contrast how they are doing on the different developments within their operations compared to what they consider to be their peer branches are doing. And then what's, I think, really, really speaks to the culture of the bank is if they're, if they want to learn from that and if they want to take action based on that, they simply need to pick up the phone to that branch manager, and she or he will be happy to pick up the phone and talk about, why it is they've done so well on reducing costs in this area, or why they've improved their income so well in that area. So there is a sort of spontaneous, organic learning process going on all over the organization, which has zero sort of head office involvement to make that happen. There's no there's no encouragement. There's no telling people you have to do this, and there's no passing up a hierarchy across and then down another side and back again. This is all about day-to-day spontaneous collaboration. And I think the biggest reason that that's possible is because we have these shared values and we have this common single goal. So it is one of those things that one mulls over from time to time, how this tension or possible tension between competing on the one hand, because of course each branch in its region wants to be above average. Every branch wants to be above average. As one of my colleagues jokes, it's never happened yet, but it tends to push the average up. But at the same time, there is only one real goal for the bank, and that's that the bank as a whole is more profitable than its competitors. So we are all one team.
Right. And I find that interesting in itself because often you'll read a lot of the literature around how the importance of having a clear purpose and meaning in our work, and seemingly the mission is so banal and yet is at the source of seemingly such sort of human flourishing and such a sort of an interesting culture. It's that to me is fascinating.
I think about that. I think that we might say, we've never put it this way, and I'm sure you could have different schools of thought on this, but one way of looking at it is, we know what our purpose is. We've known it for 50 years, and it is a commercial purpose. But where it becomes, where it connects to the human in all of us is all about the values that we share and the culture that we have. And this is a really deeply embedded culture of trust and respect. So not just trust from the organization to its employees throughout the bank, this devolved power and this decentralization, but also the trust that goes on and respect between colleagues in very, very different parts of the bank when they do lift up the receiver to speak to a different member of staff and help them, or to get help from them. That is what the oil that makes Handelsbanken's cogs go round, if you like. And it also makes it a really satisfying place to work, stimulating place to work.
Hmm. And there is one rule, as I understand it, that these branches compete with each other, but they can't take each other's customers. Is that right?
No, and that's about how we've chosen to decentralize. So if we think about why we're decentralized, it's actually right back to this core value we have, which is just an innate trust in the individual, that people want to come to work and they are capable and want to do a good job. So in that way, you need to give them responsibility and you need to give them decision-making authority. Then if you have that as a core value, then you will naturally want to decentralize your organization. And in our case, being a bank, still today, despite digitalization, the most sensible way that you can decentralize is at the geographical level. So, just for decentralization to work, for for someone to know where and what their responsibility is, you sort of need to define a patch. Now that works. That also works for the customer because they know where their branch is. You know, they have no doubts about the relationship that they have with Handelsbanken. It is really the relationship they have with their local branch. But it also, yes, it works from of cooperating. You know, I think it would be very hard to cooperate if one branch team were able to poach customers in another branch team's area and vice versa. I think, you know, it wouldn't make the job easier.
Right, and then you would get the potentially negative consequences of that if that started to creep in.
Yeah, exactly. So you sort of see how the different pieces, the different struts of the architecture sit together here. You know, I think if you start to remove one strut, you know, it's a risk that other parts of the building start to suffer at least.
Right, and talking about sticking with the branch structure, even in the digital age, and in a sense going against the tide of a lot of the other major banks, and yet your return on equity, just looking up before this interview, 2018, 12.8% versus 5.6% for the Euro average. So more successful than your average bank by some margin, whilst seemingly operating in a completely different way than I suppose the zeitgeist would expect you to operate.
Yeah, and we you know, the way we look at it is every bank has its context, its you know, pre-existing conditions, if you like, and its own culture to a certain extent as well. So, you know, if not that we do, but if we were appraising another bank's digital strategy, we'd have to understand their background context. But when we come to our own, we have not only stuck with our branches. I mean, that almost sounds like it's a pejorative way of looking at it, but we've made our branches since 1970. Really. We have made them the bank. I mean, they are their own profit center. They have the full customer responsibility. They have the full commercial responsibility in that area. If you add up all the branches of Handelsbanken, you effectively get the bank. So our expertise is, you know, our customer service expertise, but also a lot of our banking and credit expertise is there in our branches now. In some other banks, parts of that might be true. In many other banks, that's no longer true because they've gone down a different route. So when we're considering how to implement, you know, digital development, we are looking very, very straightforwardly at how we can make more of our advantage. And that advantage is that we have great expertise at a local level. We have fantastic relationship, both between the customer and the branch and within the branch at that local level as well. And these days, at least, digital advances mean that we can make those advantages available through digital channels. So it's not an either or for us. It's just how can we make our branches more available in the digital world, and how can we also use digital or digitalization to make the boring, no added value processes more efficient, and free up time for, you know, for our branches to actually develop their relationships even further and you know, increase customer satisfaction and do more profitable business. So we see it as fundamentally a great opportunity for our particular model. And I think increasingly we're seeing, you know, external commentators coming round to this view that actually digitalization is very little without the human.
You're still there? I think I'm
still there. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So digital is nothing without the human, right?
Yeah.
And that a bit. So it seems to me there's two elements to that. So you've got the individual branch structures who have this human connection with their customers, which gives them a much deeper insight when it comes to developing digital solutions. I can see, but I can also see it's like you've got hundreds of mini innovation hubs who are all their own profit centers, who are all looking to cut costs or drive revenue through digital solutions, and that can then be shared across. You're not reliant on a single centralized, digital innovation team to try and work it all out.
I mean, you'd imagine that when we come to actually developing the infrastructure itself, we have central functions to do that. What's really different about Handelsbanken is where the insight and the demand comes from. So it isn't that you start off with a digital insight and strategy team somewhere in head office, and then they come back to management and say we're just going to do this, and then at some point your branch distribution channel gets told that that's what's happening. I mean, this is completely the other way around. It's about being close to the customers, which our branches are, listening to them. And of course, as an organization, we get an awful lot of data now, so we can see what our customers are doing through various digital channels as well, and with their finances. And marrying all that up and having a really strong evidence-based confidence for what it is which will improve our customer satisfaction and what it is which will give us profitable business at the end of it. And it's in the end, it's the branches that are informing these developments. They might not be the experts on what's possible in the digital realm. I mean, let's be realistic, but they are the ones that are the experts on what customers want and what direction customers are going. And ultimately, they're the ones that are signing off the costs, because you might know we've got this kind of internal marketplace within Handelsbanken, and all costs and all income end at the branch.
Right. Yeah. It's described as in the Beyond Budgeting book, because this is hundreds of profit centers as being the way that it's you can imagine.
That's right. And then we have these, so we start on the default position that things should be decentralized, and then where there is a case for something, an overwhelming case really, for something to be centralized. And this is driven then by the branches and by our regional banks. They say, this doesn't make sense to say decentralized. We want you to do it in head office. Then, of course, that's, and I can put myself in this as well. That's our duty to serve our branches and our regions and give them what they need to do better business. And clearly, one area right back since the early mid 60s has been IT. It would have never made sense for us to have IT development going on in our what are now 800 branches, but it's where the demand comes from that counts.
Right. Yeah, I see that. And this parallels with some of the other case studies of these highly empowered cultures where you have. I'm just thinking of Buurtzorg. I don't know if you've come across them, the nursing company.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about them. Yeah, they sound fascinating.
Yeah, who are mentioned in Frederick Laloux's book, but similar idea of decentralized groups, in this case units of nurses rather than bank branches. But we each has a profit center, but then a demand on central in terms of a pull from central for resources, as opposed to the push from the center.
Yes,
like that.
That sounds very, very, very much how it works here. And this internal marketplace I mentioned, that helps just to focus minds at all times on that fact. And a couple of times a year at least, the representatives from our branches will meet with representatives or heads, if you like, from this or that central department, talk through the developments that are going on there, talk through the costs that are involved, and really try to sort of scrutinize, in a collegiate way, but nevertheless scrutinize whether these costs are, good, i.e., whether they're all going to lead to what is required from the branches, and also to identify, are there new things that department should be doing that they've, partly identified a need, and here's another opportunity to talk about that. So it is a sort of constant cycle of, if you put it from the head office's point of view, it's keeping us honest, really. It's making sure that we're always thinking about why we're doing the things we're doing. And if we can't say that it's there to support either directly or indirectly our branches and through them the customer, then we probably shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, that I can see that. Is there a role in the central function as a kind of a bailout role? If a particular branch is really struggling, is there some kind of insurance from the centre, or do you just
There is.
die? I mean, how's it work?
Yeah. No, there are. I'll start by saying we're a bank, so of course we're pretty risk averse, and I think we're probably more risk averse than most, actually. But we have what we think of as lines of defence, and our first line of defence, of course, is our branches. I mean, for reasons we've discussed already. But then, on an ongoing basis, this isn't a sort of bailout. It's not a last resort thing. This is a week in, week out. The branches have their regional support functions. So in core banking, they have credit analysts in the regional bank who they can speak to and discuss particular cases or questions they have, just to get a sounding board or a different input. Or if there's something particularly difficult to work through, they can get additional resources to do that. So that's on a business as usual level, if you like. But what if you take credit, for instance? What's important is that the initiation and the final sign off of any credit is with the branch and with the branch manager ultimately. Whereas in many other institutions, that sign off is happening way further back in their organisation. So you have that second line of defence, if you like, the regions, and you have a central credit function if there's anything that's such a big question or an issue that it needs raising there, and then we, as any bank would, we have our risk functions and our audit functions, and they are very clearly very real and active parts of the organisation to make sure that we're not accidentally letting in risk that we're not comfortable with. So yeah, we have a very sophisticated risk control system, but still, you would say the vast majority, a really vast majority of credit decisions, i.e. the biggest part of banking, are made locally, and that's fundamentally different to most banks these days.
Right, and I read, was it 50% of employees have lending authority?
Yeah, might even be a bit higher than that these days. I don't have the stat on me, but yeah, I mean, bear in mind that we have over 1,000 people working in IT, and we have thousands or so people working in nothing directly to do with core banking activities. Then that's a higher proportion still when you come to actual core business.
Yeah, so very.
Yeah. I mean, just by numerically, you're talking over 90% of lending decisions that are taken locally, either purely by the branch or between the branch and their regional bank, which is extremely high. But the wisdom of that is borne out not only in the profitability of the bank, but connected to that, I suppose, in the credit quality that we show quarter by quarter, where we have very, very low and consistent loan losses in the organisation.
And you have the highest credit rating of, is it European banks?
Yeah. We've for many years now had amongst the highest in the world, in fact. At any given time, we might be the highest or one of the top three from the major credit rating agencies, due to our capital strength and our, as I say, the consistency of our risk profile, liquidity as well. So yeah. I mean, that's one of the benefits of this long-term view. The second of our core values, alongside this trust in the individual, we have this long-term view, which guides our decisions. It does mean that we have created this stability and this dependability, which then comes through in how how customers view us. That's the most important thing. How our employees feel about working at the bank, the security that they feel in doing their jobs, and then of course how investors and the wider capital markets feel about either putting equity into the bank or bonds. So it's a great benefit to us to work in this kind of long-term sustained way, but it's because we believe fundamentally that's the best way to run a business. We don't do it to achieve high credit rating.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. And it seems like you have this marrying of very high trust in individuals and a great deal of autonomy on the front line, but with very open systems. So a lot of transparency and the ability of central functions or regional functions to monitor and suggest remedies. But that's what's interesting here. You've got two things happening. It's not total autonomy without any accountability or any visibility of what you're doing. It's high visibility and autonomy at the same time.
Absolutely. That is the sort of the way of boiling it down, I think, in terms of how it feels to work here. You feel a great deal of freedom in what you're doing. But
so it seems to me you've got this really interesting marrying of a great deal of autonomy at the front line coupled with very high degree of transparency across the whole business.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of boiling it down, and how it feels, I suppose, working here is that you feel a great deal of freedom in the day-to-day work that you're doing, and a confidence in the area that you have responsibility for, but at the same time, you feel an exposure, an accountability. So it's I put it like this: it's a very grown-up business to work in. Everyone feels or knows that they need to rise to their responsibility. And we have these principles in Handelsbanken that managers should not interfere. They shouldn't be trying to micromanage, and wherever they can avoid it, they should avoid taking decisions for their employees. But they should act as coaches, both in the professional work that employee is doing, and also to help them develop their careers around the bank and their experience around the bank, and ultimately their value to the bank, which then comes through in the reward to the individual.
And how has that felt for you? I mean, personally, if you come from, I suppose you might say, a more traditional corporate culture before Handelsbanken, what was your transition into this culture?
Yeah, I worked with a number of more orthodox, if you like, or these days more orthodox financial companies, albeit the organization I worked for, the consultancy I worked for, was actually, and still is today, a pretty enlightened and empowering place to work. But I could very, very quickly see, compared to some of those large financials I'd worked for before, just how different this was. And even then, even despite that, I think there's that period of the first 3 months, maybe 6 months, where you're expecting a hand to appear out of somewhere and say no, and sort of push you in a different direction and correct what you're doing. And it's quite it's really quite liberating, but at the same time sobering, to realize that no, that responsibility really is mine, and if this succeeds or if this fails, it's on me. And then of course that you have all the support you need from whoever you need it from in the organization, but ultimately it's your decision and it's your responsibility. It feels good.
It feels good, even without the banker bonus.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us clearly none of us come to Handelsbanken for the banker bonus. But also, I think, again, open-eyed about this, if you were to try to do some sort of valuation of a bonus. That's the easy bit, compared to the sense of fulfillment, the sense of ownership in many ways that you feel in this organization. I think the value of the bonus kind of wilts into insignificance. And then, of course, I will and must say that we pay market rates. We're part of respecting our employees and each other is that we respect their value to the organization. We're utterly a people business, even more so than most service companies, I would say. So we don't underpay our staff, but we don't believe that bonuses are a good route, and the targets that would need to attach to those bonuses are a good route to achieving cooperation internally and adaptability, and externally the most satisfied customers who know that their branches only have their interests at heart.
And that was central, I think, to Jan's philosophy, this idea of motivations based on self-satisfaction, wasn't it? That was his belief about humans.
That's right. That's a really good observation. He effectively believed people don't need any external motivating. They are motivated. They need the conditions to put that natural motivation, to make it kinetic, if you like, to turn it into good work. So they need the freedom of action, the sense of direction. What are we aiming to achieve here, and why are we aiming to achieve that? And they need to know that there's the support and security there where they need it.
And actually, that's been borne out by there's a reasonably good science now around this, that for more complex challenges, intrinsic motivation wins over extrinsic motivation. And in fact, you can have adverse performance when you extrinsically motivate people for complex problems. And it seems like running a bank is complex, and making lending decisions is complex. And so it's consistent with some of the science now around this, which I also find interesting.
Yeah. Well, it is to hear that. I think, from the nearly 50 years of working this way, and the thousands of, well, I suppose tens of thousands of employees who've worked in this way and, felt the culture, if you like, and felt the benefits. It's apparent, it's self-evident.
Right. And who are the people who don't? I mean, are there individuals who taste this culture and it doesn't work out? And is there a common theme amongst those for whom this doesn't work?
Yes, there are those. It is clearly a very small minority of people that we employ, and part of the reason for that is because we have a fairly intensive recruitment process. We're recruiting on values. So, of course, we look at the CV to check that these people have the requisite skills and experience. But really, 95% of what we're doing in a recruitment is about making sure that person feels harmony with the values of Handelsbanken, and that we feel comfortable with that person, that they'll be able to take responsibility. So we're doing our own due diligence. The candidate is doing their due diligence on ours, and we make that a fairly lengthy process of meeting a number of people in the organisation in different places. So that's a great way of filtering to those who do share the values. But nevertheless, you find from time to time, after a while, someone simply isn't playing in tune with the rest of the orchestra, and you can try coaching. We obviously always do that anyway, to see if it maybe is the role rather than the person. But ultimately, we have to part ways. And normally in that situation, it's a very comfortable discussion because the person themselves have realised that they don't feel so comfortable. And it might well be true. It might well be that they don't feel comfortable with that level of sort of exposure and responsibility, and they would rather work in a way that they're more familiar with, maybe in a sort of managed environment. And of course, we have nothing against that if that's how somebody is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And how do you describe it? You know, if you have to give a summary to sort of friends or others, you know, describe it to others, would you say the culture?
The culture, I think, I just bring it down to the trust and respect that is really apparent from day to day. You know, when you have a new problem arising and you're thinking through who I need to talk to, you simply don't have that moment's pause to think, oh, I better not call that person, or oh, I'm not sure what that department's like. I won't walk in there. You expect and you get collaboration. You expect and you get respect, whoever you are in the organization, because there is that fundamental sense that everybody is playing an important role. And there is only one corporate goal, so we're all heading in the same direction as well. So it's that openness, it's that trust, it's that respect and that cooperation. They pretty much sum up how it is to work at Handelsbanken.
Right. Right. And if somebody's listening to this, and the first thing to say is I get that to affect large scale cultural change, which clearly happened in whatever it was, 1972, initially with Handelsbanken, it requires full support from the top, which is interesting. And that's exactly what, again, Frederick Laloux says in his book, Reinventing Organizations, that you can't achieve these radical, well, to our eyes, I suppose, radical culture shifts without full support all the way up. But for somebody listening to this who's maybe a manager in a tradition, you know, a bank with a traditional culture, let's say, or an orthodox culture, and wants to do something to change the culture around them, what would be the advice you would give to that individual within their context?
I was a little loath to give advice, because I think we're fortunate enough to find a complete model that works for us, you know, through the cycle. But I suppose what I'd say is, you know, the best conditions to effect change, which do happen from time to time for businesses, is some kind of crisis. So some kind of, you know, sustained negative situation, because you're focusing minds and you're focusing on change for a start. And then I think, you know, it really is the blood, sweat and tears of the leader there, and the charisma of that person. I mean, they sort of need the vision and they need the charisma to take people with them. And I think that's, you know, one thing that Jan Wallander had to his credit as well. And then stamina. Crikey.
Yeah, that resonates. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know we're 1 minute over time, so I really appreciate the time you've given to this call. I really hope that people get some inspiration from this, you know, to hear what it's like to work in one of these highly empowered cultures. I've certainly got a lot from it.
Well, thank you for giving me the time to talk about Handelsbanken.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed, and enjoy the rest of your day in Sweden. And
okay. Thank you. All the best, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye.